All right, the call is to order. It is 6:09. Welcome to the August 28th version of the Planning and Transportation Commission, City of Palo Alto. Let's do a roll call.
Vice Chair Alchek.
Present.
Commissioner Lowy.
Present.
Chair Riggs.
Present.
Chair Riggs.
Present.
Commissioner Rupavar.
Present.
Commissioner Suma.
Present.
Commissioner Templeton.
Present.
Commissioner Waldvogel. All right, everyone is present.
All right, any oral communications, any individual member of the public want to speak to things that are not on the agenda? Okay, I have no cards and seeing none. Seeing none. Okay. Mr. Planning Director, any additions, changes, announcements before we get started?
No changes.
All right, so first item is a director's report with kind of a schedule and assignments, I believe. Anything to report?
Yeah, so just a couple of announcements. One, just to let the commission know that we went to the city council, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, and got some direction on the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan. So we had some good dialogue, got some feedback and general support to move forward with some slight changes to the schedule and adjustments to the scope of work with our prime consultant. We'll be returning to the council at their next meeting or the one thereafter with a scope of work to study the possible options for naturalizing the Matadero Creek within this discrete study area. And then thereafter we have another scope of work change for Perkins Will, our prime consultant. So that's coming, forthcoming. Last meeting, I introduced Assistant Director Rachel Tanner, and Rachel will be transitioning into the role that I've been serving with the commission for the past several years. She will now serve as the Planning and Transportation Commission liaison, so you will see her bright face here on Wednesdays. I'm at a website, you know, blasting live across the universe. Don't be nervous about that. And then I want to also introduce Vin Nguyen, who is joined us, and he was the one who pronounced the roll call this evening. Vin is a new employee, and he will have the responsibility of not only serving the Planning and Transportation Commission, but also the Architectural Review Board, the Historic Resources Board, and our director hearings. And so with that, he has the responsibility of our public noticing, preparing the packets for the commissions and the boards, making sure that the meetings have been set up, and the tear down, and follow through with the minutes, and a whole variety of other work. And he still comes to work with a big smile on his face, and so we're totally excited about that. But this is his first meeting, so we'll see. Once we run through the gauntlet of all those meetings, we'll see if he's still smiling. All right, so that's the end of the director's report.
Riveting. Yeah, sorry. Just, no, thank you very much. That's great. So I guess we should move on to our second item, which is a study session. Public comment is permitted, 3 minutes per speaker, but I believe before we do that, we have an introduction of the new transportation director, new chief transportation official.
Great, so yeah, Philip Cami, chief transportation planning official, right? No, chief. Transportation official. Sorry, I tried to bring you into the planning side again. We just separated you guys, and now you're okay. All right, Philip, take it away.
Actually, Chantal will kick this off.
Good evening, Chair Riggs and Commission. My name is Chantal Cotton Gaines. I'm an assistant to the city manager here for the city of Palo Alto, and up until Mr. Cami arrived last week, I've been filling in leading the transportation office upstairs. So we thought it would be fitting for the two of us to give this presentation today, just an overview of where transportation is and the future of transportation in Palo Alto with Philip, and items that we'll be bringing forward to the PTC over the coming months. So it's really an introduction item today. So I wanted to give, which some of this may be redundant to some of you if you're following all the details of transportation, but I think it helps to bring everyone to the same place. I wanted to give an overview of where the Office of Transportation is right now. As you are aware, we previously had been within the planning department, so planning and community environment, and transportation was a division. And the City Council has prioritized transportation in some form or another over the past 6 years as one of their council stated priorities each year. And this year, they really wanted to put more emphasis on transportation. And in response to that, the city manager pulled transportation out of planning to make it its own office to really match the level of attention that the council has been putting on transportation over the years. And in the budget adoption in June this year, for the FY 2020 budget, the City Council officially made the Office of Transportation. And so the Chief Transportation Official was leading a team of about 14 other staff members now and reporting directly to the City Manager. So I just wanted to give a little more context there. In the budget, the shift to moving it out, we set a purpose, mission, and goals for the Office of Transportation. In previous budgets, transportation had one performance metric in the community and planning and community environment department's budget pages. So this was our opportunity to really just describe what transportation does and to set some metrics. So there's about 12 pages now focused on transportation in the budget, and I wanted to read the mission and purpose, if I could, to you guys right now. So the mission for the Office of Transportation. The Office of Transportation's mission is to preserve and enhance the quality of life for Palo Alto residents, visitors, and businesses by providing efficient and cost-effective transportation services for all modes of transportation. And our purpose, the purpose of the Office of Transportation is to improve the safety of the users for all modes of transportation, reduce reliance on single occupancy vehicles, address congestion, and reduce through traffic and non-resident parking in Palo Alto neighborhoods, leading to an integrated transportation system that serves local, regional, and intercity travel. In the budget as well, we set a goal focused on staff retention. As you know, we've had quite a bit of turnover in our transportation team over the past couple of years, and so we really wanted to emphasize that the people really make the office work. And we have requested in the budget some additional management positions, and the City Council did approve those. So we have a parking and shuttle manager that was added, as well as a senior engineer. The idea is we need more people to help really meet some of the priorities set by the City Council. So those were included in the budget as well, with a focus on developing our staff. And then just two more quick points before we get into some of the things that will be coming to the PTC. So we have actually one more quick point. The City Council approved those manager positions, and we are actually actively recruiting for them. So the two critical positions we have just filled are the Chief Transportation Official, who you'll hear from in a second, as well as the Senior Transportation Planner. And the two new positions, we are actively working on getting the recruitments actually out on the ground so that we can get those people in. So with that, I'll turn it over to Philip to talk about some items that'll be coming to you guys soon.
All right. Thank you, Chantal. So I'm Philip Cami. I'm the new Chief Transportation Official here. I'm very pleased to be here before the Planning and Transportation Commission. So I'm working to get a better understanding of all of the projects that are ongoing. This is really the start of my second week here, and also working on a prioritization of projects within the Office of Transportation. But I'm going to give you a list of some of the items that we really anticipate will be coming to PTC over the next coming months. One of those is parking management, which is something that I worked on in my previous role here at the city. We've compiled a parking work plan, and that work plan came from the work of Wayne Tonda, who's a consultant with the city. And it says that there are about 9 recommendations that we'll be working on with the PTC coming from that work plan. Also the RPP, which is also something that I worked on in my previous role here with the city. And going back to the purpose, I thought about underlining this as Chantal said it, but the Office of Transportation, one of our purposes is to reduce through traffic and non-resident parking in Palo Alto neighborhoods. And so RPPs are a program that do work to address that, and tonight you'll be hearing from our parking operations lead, Mark Herr, on the RPP for Old Palo Alto. Traffic calming measures as projects come up, and I do anticipate we'll have some projects coming up similar to the Middlefield North project, which came here in the past. We'll have policy changes regarding level of service to vehicle miles traveled as required by state law, and as it relates to CEQA. And also policy changes regarding to transportation demand management. And with that, I believe we'd be happy to take any questions.
Commissioner Lowing.
Congrats. I hope you know what you're getting in for. We're happy to have bodies and seats to move things along. That's really good to hear. One of the questions I was going to ask is how many openings are left? Because I know you've been doing some backfill.
We currently have 2 openings
Okay.
That we'll be filling.
Okay, so just the 2 she mentioned. That's great. And the council sent the work plan to you with 35 recommendations on parking. So did I hear that right, that you've narrowed it down to 9 that we're going to be working with you on, and the other 20-something we won't?
Yeah, I believe that 9 of them are items that should come to the PTC. Some of them relate to staffing, et cetera. And I'm sorry to go back, the correct positions that we need to fill is 2.5. Sorry.
Okay. So were you finished discussing the recommendations that 9 sort of need to come to PTC and then the others won't?
Yes, I believe so.
So the 35 recommendations from Mr. Tonda's report include some things that are administrative changes. So just in terms of, I have the report with me as well, but in terms of things that have to do with how staff rolls out different pieces of the program, so those are less of bigger discussions and more of things that just need to happen. So of the 35 recommendations, there are 9 of them that are what Mr. Tonda recommended as things where we know we needed more enhanced community engagement and conversation around them, because it's things like setting a parking occupancy percentage for a threshold where we see like this is a parking issue versus it's not if it's less than that threshold. So that's the example of one of the 9 that will come to PTC.
Okay. Yeah, I think I would speak for more than myself if I say that, if more than 9 you'd like to have help with, that they don't have to come here, we'd be glad to jump in and help, on behalf of the community and have hearing time for them as well.
Much appreciated.
The next question is, how is this going to work in terms of a liaison? Will you also have a transportation liaison in addition to the planning liaison to this commission?
It's a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. In the past, in my 3 years almost of service on this commission now, there was sometimes a gap because there just wasn't somebody that, and this is not a reflection on planning staff whatsoever, but it'd be more communicative to us, and perhaps we could give you earlier feedback on some issues if there was a separate person. I understand that's more workload, but Jonathan will tell you it's really fun. So. That's all.
Thank you.
Commissioner Templeton.
I also wanted to say thank you to Chantal and welcome to Phil in this new role. We're really excited to have you here. As Commissioner Lowing noted, we would love to see even more transportation projects. It's been light on that front, so we're eager to help. And I think there's also a community interest that we have another opportunity for input on several types of projects around the city. So hopefully we'll be seeing more of your smiling faces, and excited to have you on board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'll chime in. I'm actually still disappointed. I have to say, I was expecting more out of this, even based on the conversation we had before. The priorities that were mentioned didn't mention any. We've asked for data initiatives. We've asked to actually see Mr. Tonda's recommendations before they were finalized. None of that's been provided to us, so I feel like my fellow commissioners are being kinder. I provided a warning from the dais that I thought this was a bad idea to pull transportation out of planning. I believe that was a year and a half ago. The liaison suggestion is not only important, it's essential. I thought we would get a little more update of what's happening with a lot of the rail crossing issues. I didn't hear reference to the circulation element once. So I think there's some really deep-rooted issues here where we're in pulling planning away from transportation initiatives. We're actually setting ourselves up for conflict with our general plan. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. I was expecting a little more, and I think I even said this in the pre-meeting. I was a little caught off guard that we weren't having a more robust discussion today. I guess I'm encouraged we have a warm body in the position now. Not that, and Ms. Gaines, you've been amazing to work with, but I guess you have a lot on your plate, doing basically 2 jobs. But we have to up our game in transportation, and I'm not sure that. I think you have 7 people here that have been asking for stuff, and we've been underutilized in terms of our expertise and our willingness to work on this issue.
I'll make a brief comment.
Commissioner Suma.
Well, thank you for coming and talking to us today, and thank you for the update. And I'm looking forward to us, getting into these issues. And thank you very much to Mr. Cami for coming back to Palo Alto. So let's just take it from here, I think. Thanks.
All right, seeing no other lights and comments, I think we're done with this item. Moving on to our 2 action items for this evening. Our first item 3, is a recommendation to the City Council. And thank you both. I'm assuming you're sticking around, but we have a recommendation to City Council to adopt a resolution for Old Palo Alto residential preferred parking program as a 1-year pilot. I believe we have a presentation from staff, and then we'll open it up for comments. I do have 2 comment cards for this agenda item. If there's any more, if you could get them in with, if you can just hand them to me, that'd be great.
I'm going to step out for this because I'm within 500 feet of the district.
And that sounds good. Commissioner Walfogel is recusing himself based on his residential location.
Okay, once again, I'm Philip Cami, the Chief Transportation Official, and tonight I'm going to be introducing to you Mark Herr, who's our Parking Operations Lead. I believe I mentioned him in the last item. Mark was here previously when I was here in my former role, working on parking behind the scenes and doing a lot of the good work in order to make sure that the RPPs have timely implementation. As such, tonight he's here to assist the Old Palo Alto with their own RPP district.
Good evening, Commissioners. Tonight we have a short presentation on the proposed Old Palo Alto RPP with the goal of reviewing the program and hopefully formalizing an item to bring before Council on September 16th. We will start with providing some background on the program and how we got to this particular date in the program development. The citywide RPP ordinance requires neighborhoods meet a certain level of steps to initiate the development of an RPP program. Examples outlined in the ordinance include that non-resident vehicles substantially interfere with the use of on-street parking spaces by neighborhood residents, that the interference by non-resident vehicles occurs at irregular intervals, that non-resident vehicles parked in an area of the proposed district create traffic congestion or other disruptions that disrupts neighborhood life. Residents of Old Palo Alto submitted a petition which met most, if not all, the requirements of the ordinance. Here's a brief timeline of the old Palo Alto RPP. Back in August of 2018, city staff received a formal petition from residents in Old Palo Alto. On March 27th of this year, we brought 3 petitions to PTC to prioritize the districts that had requested RPP, with the commission prioritizing Old Palo Alto as the first and the highest priority. In the month of April, city staff collected initial data regarding parking occupancy and parking supply in Old Palo Alto. In May, city directed staff to initiate program development. In June and July, the Office of Transportation began program design, modifying the parameters to meet while meeting with residents and community workshops. In the month of August, residents were surveyed, and based on their support and feedback, we are presenting for your review and recommendation to adopt a resolution for a 1-year RPP pilot program in Old Palo Alto. And with that recommendation, staff will present an action item to council on September 16th. With council's approval, our anticipation program start date is on November 1st. City staff participated in a number of community engagement exercises. Once receiving the petition in August of 2018 up until the PTC meeting earlier this year, we had been in regular communication with the residents, defining processes and possible solutions to their parking intrusion. On July 31st, city staff hosted a community workshop at Jerry Bowden Park to discuss the proposed program boundaries and other items related to the program. And city staff mailed individual surveys to residents on August 6th. This will cover the data collection that city staff had accumulated over the past couple of months. Parking occupancy data was collected by city staff on April 16th, 17th, 18th, and the 24th at various hours of the day listed on this slide, which includes 9 a.m., 12 p.m., 3 p.m., and 6 p.m. On this slide, you will find the results of our collection. The blocks included are street segments outlined in the original RPP petition. The streets included, shaded in blue, had a parking occupancy between 0 to 50%, orange blocks 51% to 74%, and finally red with a parking occupancy of 75% or higher. And as you can see, the areas with the highest parking intrusion are those closest to the California Avenue underpass. Shortly after the community workshop, staff surveyed residents in the areas with the highest parking intrusion, those streets that are red and orange from the previous slide. Information on the survey included the number of permits per household, permit fees, and the proposed boundaries of the RPP district. Residents were given 14 days to respond with their support or opposition to RPP restrictions. Here you'll find the results of the survey. As of August 19th, staff received 55 out of 93 surveys with a return rate of 59%. Out of the 55 return surveys, 49 residents supported RPP restrictions while 6 residents opposed. 89% of the return surveys support of the program was well above the 70% requirement outlined in our guidelines. And this is our recommended program design. The boundaries of the pilot or core of the district is highlighted in red. Street segments in blue may petition the Office of Transportation to be annexed into the program after the initial rollout of the program. Residents who reside outside the proposed district are not eligible for parking permits. The Old Palo Alto program will release resident permits available to those who live within the district. Annual hang tag permits will be issued for this particular district at $50 per permit with 5 permits per household. Residents may also purchase visitor daily hang tag permits at $5 a permit, and they are limited to 50 per year, which expires at the end of the program year. and we are proposing no employee permits for this district. Next steps, we hope to bring a program before council on September 16th and receive direction on whether to move forward with the RPP program. With council's approval, staff will move forward with permit sales and sign installation in October, and our anticipated launch date is early November. And then during the pilot year of the program, staff will monitor parking patterns and continue working with the residents to refine the program. This concludes our presentation, and we're welcome to any questions or comments from the commission.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from our commissioners? Commissioner Templeton.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. I really appreciated your clear charts and maps about the areas that will be affected by the permit. One technical question I have is, on your survey, you indicate you didn't do any surveys past, sorry, I'm looking at this slide, not that survey, the audit of parking.
Yes.
That you didn't do any survey past 6 p.m., but in the findings on section 1A, which is on page 3A or packet page 17, you say that the parking patterns indicate that the evening was so lightly parked that it was clear that there was a difference. How did you find the difference if you didn't survey it in the evening?
We saw a significant drop in occupancy.
Even by 6?
Essentially after 5 p.m., which
Okay.
most of the vehicles have been leaving the area.
Can you quantify that?
Oh, this was done by, manual counts by city staff during those times.
Did you have a number of, like, it went from this at noon to this at 6?
We had those in multiple documents, so we'd need some time to review those numbers.
Oh, that's okay. I just wondered if you had it handy. It would be helpful to make that finding. Thank you.
Commissioner Lowing.
Yes, I just want to note that the PTC made this in our last referral the number one priority, and we actually asked for a pilot to accelerate this, and then council approved that. So I think we're right on track and consistent with where we have been before. So we can continue the discussion, but I'd just like to get a motion on the table to support the recommendation as
Sorry,
itemized.
we can't, we're not ready for that yet.
Oh, okay, sorry, okay. My only question is, if there was a hard stop, how do I ask this question? For example, one block of Washington in that circular block wasn't included, another one was. Was there hard data there, or was that more of a judgment call?
There's data that supports the drop in parking occupancy.
Okay. That's all.
So yeah, the microphones are tricky. If you leave them on, it's actually hard to hear. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. I have a couple questions. In the occupancy survey, are you specifying the data based on block face? It's not clear how you're specifying this data in your visualization.
Yes, so the occupancy count includes both sides of...
No, but this is by individual block face. Clearly, a percentage requires a calculation. So is it by individual block that you're doing the calculation?
It's a combination of both sides of the block. About one
So both sides of the blocks are not decoupled from one another.
Yeah. No, it's by block. It's by block, yes.
All right, so if the north, south, or east side were any different, we wouldn't know.
Yes, that's correct.
Is there a way to disaggregate that data, or are they just...
We would need additional time to review the collection.
All right, so, and I guess the second question, because the visualization is poor. Why 3 cohorts? I mean, there's 74% to 100% is a big range, as is 51% to 74%. Can you unpack that at all? Can you tell me, like in a histogram, what that means in terms of, you know, are we, you know, the average, is the midpoint around 60%? I can't infer much from this data.
Not off the console.
I think, you know, I can take this question a bit. I can't really provide you with the answer that you're looking for, but I think what I can say is that in the future, we can bring back a lot more data charts for the RPPs, different times, as was requested, and, you know, an average occupancy by the zone. And I think that's a reasonable thing to provide.
But can you anecdotally say which block is 74% and which block is, for example, 95%?
Yes, we can. We do have the data to represent those
Okay,
numbers.
can you provide that for us maybe at some point this evening? That'd be great.
We can see if we can pull that together, but I guess, you know, to give you the basic assumption that we would have is that the closer you get to the Caltrain tunnel, the higher the occupancy is.
Yeah, we just don't see that here, right? And
no, I
and
completely-
if there's, you know, you've worked in parking before, you know, if you're operating 85 to 95%, you can still squeeze more occupancy out of your inventory. Clearly, 95% is effectively full. So if you tell me that most of these blocks are 74%, I think there's not an acute issue. So I can't say anything. I can't infer anything from this data.
Your point's taken.
And while he's pulling it up, I will make a plug back to the recommendations as well, that one of them, this is kind of that conversation about having a set parking occupancy threshold as well, because then it's something to link back to, which is a discussion we'll have in the future.
All right, so I have one more question, then I'm just going to put out there. What's the rubric for the policy proposal? Number of cars? I don't see any connection back to the circulation element or back to other policy. It just seems random.
Well, so this is resident requested.
Right, but the city is approving it. So how does it connect to our circulation element? How does it connect to our city goals? You just stated the city goals. Is it consistent? I think we have to make that judgment. I see no rubric in terms of assessing that number. You just say, no, there wasn't a rubric. Is that the answer? There.
So I guess I'm not exactly sure what you're asking to, but that said, I also will say that I'm not sure that I'm best equipped to answer this at this time because I'm reviewing this item after it's already, you know, somewhat published. So, yeah, I'm not sure that, at this time, I'm not sure that I can fully answer your question, but I'm not really sure what your question is.
Sounds good. Any other questions? Seeing no lights, we'll enter the public hearing piece. So I have 4 speaker cards. If anyone else would like to speak, please give me a card. First, we'll have Barbara Corlitz. We have 3 minutes. And don't worry, Barbara, we won't start you until you get up here. And behind Barbara, Elizabeth Shepard.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. Really, I'd like to thank both the city and our neighborhood for setting a quick time schedule and, more amazing, sticking to it. I've been very impressed with the staff and the way it's proceeded in a fairly rapid fashion, and the fact that our neighborhood received our survey requests on a Monday and they needed to be back the next Monday, and we managed to get that many people to return them in August was a very good sign of the enthusiasm. I encourage us to keep up this pace and send the 1-year pilot to the City Council in 2 weeks and implement it in November as suggested by the staff report. I've lived in this corner of Palo Alto for nearly 50 years, and I can certainly attest to the fact that the problem has grown steadily worse during that time. I'd add that since the Mayfield Evergreen RPP began and commuters, employees, and customers can no longer park in that neighborhood on the other side of Alma and Caltrain from us, our situation has become much more dire. And the comments about the closer you get to the underpass, the more dense the parking is certainly true. I'm happy that we have a chance to discuss, evaluate, and tweak this pilot plan in a year's time, after we have had some real-time experience with it, which I think should make all of us more confident as we go forward that we are not setting into absolute concrete something which we would prefer to be able to change. So, with that, onward. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Elizabeth Shepard, followed by Rod Miller.
Hi, Elizabeth Shepard. I'm a homeowner in the affected area in Old Palo Alto. We are continuing to see day parkers, and it is having a big effect on the quality of life. I've lived there for 9 years, and I've seen a huge change in the last 2 years. Just this evening before coming over here, I was trying to unload my elderly dog in front of my house because I have to carry him in and out of the car. There's a car parked just in such a way it was difficult for me to pull up in front of the sidewalk. I'm very happy with the program that the Transportation Division has come up with. I think they did a really nice job. I'm willing to pay for it. So I'd ask you to please support that and allow it to go forward to the council for implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Rod Miller, followed by Chris Robel.
Could we go back to the criteria slide, please? Okay, I have a problem with the bottom item. To me, that sounds like we're giving up on alternatives to the RPP and making the RPP a permanent program, which in my mind is only going to expand. Anything that's permanent just gets bigger. So maybe that's poor wording on the slide, but it sure gives me some heartburn. Any response? Are we letting the RPP be permanent and not giving up on trying to find alternatives?
So just as a
Point of order, yeah.
in terms of just the process, this is your your opportunity to speak, and it's not really a time for questions, but the chair perhaps could refer those questions to staff.
Okay. Doesn't understand the process. Oh.
So yeah, you'll want to complete your public comments, and then we're going to continue with the public meeting.
All right,
and
okay.
the chair
I made
eventually.
my comment,
Thank
so
you.
I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Robel.
Thank you, Commissioners, for the opportunity to speak. And I've been working very closely with the city, Chantal and Mark and team on this getting set up. And I appreciate the partnership and the efforts to move this along. I did want to, first of all, just underscore that this has been happening for, I mean, I have emails from 2017, so this is something that we've been working on a long time. It's not something that's a new initiative from 2018. And I secondly want to say that, so the point is we really need to get parking relief. This is something that I know many of you have said that we want to get a pilot sooner, and I want to underscore that. There is extremely strong and consistent desire to have this done, so I think we have among the highest participation rate and favorable rate of any of the RPPs. Just to give you an example, the Evergreen Mayfield was only at 20% participation rate, whereas we're at a 59%, and we were at 72 with the survey, and they had a 68% support, and we have an 89% according to this, but it's even higher because we've had people that have, after the 19th, said that they want to do this. We really only had 1 week in the middle of August, and we didn't know exactly when we get this survey, and we had 1 week from the time it showed up in our mailboxes on Saturday, the prior to the 19th. So it was really a 1 week and 2-day turnaround. So bottom line is, I'm really asking for this to please just pass, please just pass this as it is. This is a pilot. Let's get it off the ground. I don't want to do anything to disturb or jeopardize the November 1st date. I know that they're short on resources, and I really want to, again, thank the team that we've gotten this far, and we have, like I said, I think it's something that we just ask that you prioritize and not, make perfect the enemy of good. Thank you.
All right, any other comments? Any other speakers from the public? Okay. Anybody? Seeing none, the hearing for that item is closed. We'll bring it back to the commission. So maybe we can give, I'm going to take questions as they come, and I'll let you know. I have two, all right, I'm going to take comments from the commissioners as they come, but maybe we can get, some, if staff wanted to provide an answer to Mr. Miller in terms of kind of, where the last bullet comes from and then the exact meaning of that bullet, that would be helpful.
That bullet, I believe, comes directly from the code.
Right, so that is directly from the ordinance.
Yes.
All right, so nothing else to add. Plan Director Late in terms of, okay. So I have two lights on. If I have Commissioner Olczyk and Commissioner Templeton, I'll take them as they come. Commissioner Olczyk.
Okay, good evening. Allow me to lighten the mood. Welcome. We are excited to have somebody in your position at the top that is going to be available to us and accountable to the city, and we're eager to work with you. I think this is a tough night to sit in the seat. And just so you know that if, I suggest that there's some opportunities here to sort of address issues, those are just that, opportunities, I think, rather than, from my perspective, disappointments or anything. Okay, I appreciate Commissioner Lowing's eagerness to move on this item. I want to take a step back, though, and have a little bit of a dialogue. It is true, on March 27th this year, we did formally recommend that the council direct staff to begin. I want to sort of suggest to you that my perspective is that we directed staff, we recommended that council direct staff to begin the process of evaluating the merits of an RPP program in this neighborhood. And one of the themes of those meetings that we've had in the past with respect to RPP, whether it was this specific one or the one that we did before, I think we even did one, I can remember once having a sincere debate with Commissioner Rosenblum at the time, prior commissioner, about what is the vision for the city's off-street or on-street parking utilization. What is the goal? Is it 50%? Is it 85%? Is it 95%? I would suggest to you that one of the themes of the evening on March 27th was that we need to understand that it's not so much that every RPP has to have the same execution, but RPPs should be approached with some level of consistency in terms of how we evaluate it. It is entirely clear, and very Palo Alto, by the way, that the process to engage the protocol has been very well thought out. If you look at the report and you kind of take a look at page 9, packet page 9, the steps a neighborhood has to go through are very clear. Someone has clearly walked this process through. E is problematic. E is the crux, right? So after they do this step and then this step and then you do this and you do this and you do this, we get to E and we have to make a recommendation. We don't have criteria. That's, in my opinion, highly problematic to continuing, to making a motion tonight. And the reason why I've struggled with the other RPs is for the same reason. And every time we get into this situation with RPPs, we suggest we need the logic. And the response is, well, listen, we're going to try it as a pilot, and then we're going to come back with logic, and we need more time or we're understaffed. I feel like that's not working anymore from my perspective. And it would be a bad idea to start like that again. I think there's a lot of neighborhoods that are wondering how this evaluation takes place. I'll ask a few questions. We did the analysis on April 18th, right? The parking survey. Do I have that right?
Correct. 4 days in April.
Do you know what date the city parking lot off of Page was closed and construction began there?
I do not.
Are you aware that there's a parking lot that's no longer accessible? Do you know how many spaces are in that parking lot?
Approximately there's 300
Yeah.
spaces, yes.
Here's a big problem. You did an analysis in April. We don't understand or appreciate how the problem has maybe gotten worse, especially considering that you did the surveys in August, which for sure, we know that am I right? You did the surveys in August? 93 surveys? I know the lot was worked on then. So to what extent is the neighborhood's response to this issue affected by the influx of having to share that street as a result of 300 spaces being taken off of Cal Ave? My sense is that you appreciate that that's kind of a big deal. Maybe you don't. I feel like it's a huge deal. I'm not opposed to us instituting RPPs in this city, but without a logical framework where I can understand what is the city's goal, and I'm not suggesting I need to align my own views with that goal. I need to understand if the city's view here is that these blocks are for the exclusive use of the residents, and that's what this purpose is the purpose of our RPP to make this asset, this parking asset, exclusive to the residential neighborhood? Or is our purpose to make it easier for the residential parcels to enjoy that public parking asset in conjunction with their neighboring businesses, employees? There's sort of a different issue here, which is Caltrain. I understand that there are a lot of Caltrain users that may park in this neighborhood. I am also under the impression, and this is not something in your report, that the Caltrain lot is often not full, which is shocking that it's not sort of discussed in this report, because that deficiency should be a part of the analysis. If you were to say to me that on a daily basis in your survey, you found that the Caltrain lot was 75% full, and you told me that there were, I don't know, do you know how many spaces are in the Caltrain lot? I mean, I'm just being hypothetical here, but just so I can keep my hypo. If it's 75% full and there's 300 spaces, then we've got a lot of spaces there. Then the question becomes, how do we make it, I'm familiar that in Redwood City, for example, they were considering the development of a new parking lot structure. And in lieu of doing that, they created some digital street signage that identified how many spaces were actually available in the parking structures that they already had as a way to see if they could address the problem because they had so much space. And then they decided ultimately not to build the garage because they sort of woke up to their underutilization of their garages. So the question here is, number one, from my perspective, I cannot support a recommendation at this time. If I were to support a motion tonight, it would be to continue this item so that we could, number one, understand what is the purpose of our RPP. I think I made that one clear, you got that. And then the second would be, we really need to understand, number one, how has this problem been impacted by the 300 parking spaces taken off a page? Number two, to what extent are we underutilizing what we already have there for Caltrain? And then I would suggest to you that the third issue that I struggled a lot with was the determination that every household was entitled to 5 hanging permits. Our downtown RPP, I believe, allows for 2. Our Crescent Park RPP allows for 2. What is the logic that an old Palo Alto resident, what was the logic that went into the determination that old Palo Alto residents should have 5 cars parked on their, I mean, I'm assuming you have a street with 10 houses. If the 10 houses all park 50 cars on their street, I mean, where do we come up with that number? How does that even seem rational?
The number of permits per household was discussed at the community workshop on July 31st, and we had originally proposed 2 permits per household. But based on the feedback that we received from a majority of the residents, they had asked for additional permits similar to downtown and then Evergreen Park Mayfield, which was 5 permits per household.
Mayfield has 5 permits per household?
Correct.
Okay, and downtown?
Downtown is 5 as well. College Terrace, RPP, and Crescent Park, NOP, only allow 2 permits per household.
2, okay. Look, if you were to tell me that I can't park on my street for more than 2 hours at a time without a hang permit, I would tell you, I'll take 20 permits. I'll take as many as you get, because if I'm gonna, why, they're transferable.
Correct.
It's not a fair question to ask a resident. How much do you want to be impacted by this highly restrictive policy? The answer is going to be 0. I'd like to have no impact. So again, we have to fall back. What sort of approach to parking and transportation do we want to encourage in this city? What in our comp plan suggests that we want residents of Palo Alto to park 5 cars on the street? It just doesn't make sense. I think a much more appropriate one data point would be, from my perspective, how many cars are in this neighborhood? How many cars are owned by the residents in this neighborhood? If most of the residents own 2 cars, are they anticipating utilization of these parking permits by staff members of their household that come during the day? And that's why they need 5 each? Maybe neighbors could share them since they're transferable, and each neighbor can get 2, and if you know you're going to need some, maybe you go next door and we encourage some sort of community engagement. I'm a little uncomfortable with the, I guess what this boils down to is it's another component of the execution of a policy that doesn't have a logic. So it's simply because the feedback suggested they wanted 5. I think if you were to poll the Crescent Park community, what they thought, they'll tell you they want 5 too. Those are my comments. If I'll summarize again in conclusion that I think we have to stop moving things forward without the foundational sort of approach that gives the whole city an idea of how we accomplish this process. Not just what you have to do by March 1st and, and November 1st, but how we make this assessment, because it seems to me like it's catching in every neighborhood, and I anticipate every year we'll have another one. This is the 3rd or 4th one we've done now, and I'm worried that if we continue to approach this with approval, okay, start another pilot program, the next one will be just as complex and sort of without the right level of strategy. So I would support, I'm not going to make a motion, but I would support a motion that we continue this item, come back in a month, understand how the construction has affected the issue, understand maybe develop a strategy that articulates how we feel about the street so that we can begin applying that uniformly everywhere. And third, maybe we have a logic about how we evaluate which neighborhoods get 5 permits per household and which neighborhoods get 2. Okay, that's it.
Ms. Gaines.
Yes, thank you so much,
Cotton
Mr.
Gaines,
Chair.
sorry.
It's okay. Both of them are technically my name. I did want to point out one of the things related to the recommendations that came from the MRG report from Mr. Tanda is really hitting at that emphasis on we need uniformity and consistency amongst the RPP so that when that report went to council, the direction they provided to staff was continue moving forward on the RPPs that had been prioritized based off the work that came from PTC, but then also start working on these bigger recommendations, which really are asking those base questions of what's the purpose of our RPP.
You know, I'll suggest that you've had that information from Mr. Tonda for a while and just been sitting on it, so I respect that, and yet I can quite easily dismiss it. So
Just
thank
showing
you.
your awareness.
I appreciate you bringing it up, but I think it underscores Commissioner Olczyk's point. Commissioner Templeton and Commissioner Rupivar.
Thank you. I am wondering, well, first I should say that I'm inclined to take some action either now or when we decide this, to support the request from the neighbors, so that you guys understand. I think that we've heard a lot of support this time and last time for the neighbors. I think there's a slight process issue that we need to make sure that whatever decision we make is solid. So that's where some of these questions are coming from. For me, my questions were around the transition. You know, we've described this as a temporary setup. I've seen no information about what the transition would be like, how it would be decided if it's going to be continued or if we're going to end it. So understanding, you know, the scope of the commitment would help, I think, many of us come to a decision. You've even heard members of the community question about how do we know this won't go on forever? And that's because the report doesn't describe any transition or decision-making process, whether to extend or terminate it. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, the pilot does not continue past the, whatever it is, I can't remember if it's October 31st date without approval.
Well, how does that approval work? Is there a trigger? Are we going to have another survey? Are we going to have another assessment, analysis?
Do you remember? Well, yes, first of all, we will do another occupancy study during the year to determine what the occupancy levels are. Second, I can't remember what occurred in the past, if it goes to council or if it comes to PTC, but somebody needs, you know, one of the boards needs to approve it. Sandy, do you remember?
But it's not included in the resolution, I guess, is my concern. None of that description.
Yes, so the code does say that the pilot period can be up to 2 years. And what we have historically done is have a 1-year pilot period. And then after that pilot period, the item does go back to council for a determination on whether to adopt a new resolution continuing the RPP program.
So it's just agendized, but is there any commitment from the staff to provide more information to council at that time so they can make a decision?
Well, I will say that historically we have. Yeah, we provide all of the occupancy data. Members of the public typically come speak on it. It's, yeah. So yes.
But it's not going to be written down or it's not part of what you want us to weigh in on tonight.
I believe that's part of the ordinance. So you're talking about what item we would bring back, or are you talking about the process?
How do you know? Yeah, so I'm suggesting that if you, it might be better to add a line in here that says what the criteria are. They'll be revisited when it goes before council. And just be very explicit about it, because then we know that it's not arbitrary or cryptic. It would be great if you can also include that it comes back to us, to the Planning Commission, before going to council. Thank you.
Commissioner we done? Yes. Commissioner Rupivar and Commissioner Suma.
Thank you. I have a few questions. So I want to better understand, in terms of, you know, each resident getting 5 permits. On top of that, they have their own parking spots and their own driveways. So we're talking about like between 7 to 9, parking spaces per household. Kind of doesn't make sense. Why did you choose 5? And what do other RPP programs have? And what was the process between choosing 5 for this area, 2 for another area, 3 for another area, or is it arbitrary?
So I think all the RPPs, if I can speak for Mark, and he'll kick me if I'm saying this incorrectly, but all of the RPPs that have been recently initiated have been 5. So this is to keep some consistency with all the recent RPP programs. It's been 5, but also it's a resident elected thing. So there was community engagement with the residents that, you know, determined that they wish to have 5. That said, historically, in most areas, the residents do not purchase all 5 permits that they're allowed. And that's just what we've evidenced from the other RPP districts that we've established that do allow 5 per residence.
How many recent ones have there been that have gotten 5?
3. Yeah, Evergreen Park, Mayfield, Southgate, and downtown.
So 4, and then how many total do you have RPP programs that don't have all in?
Just Crescent.
2. College Terrace and Crescent Park are only allowed 2 permits per household.
Okay. Another issue that I just wanted to reiterate, I'm left a little bit concerned as to the data and the results presented because of the issue raised about the garage and whether that was taken into consideration and the point, Commissioner, the garage on the parking lot that Commissioner Alchek raised, and was that taken into consideration? And also the fact that what Chair Riggs raised about the 75% to 100%, where exactly on the street there's more traffic or less traffic, and the issue about the Caltrain lot being not full. Because at first blush, you would think, well, it's all that overflow Caltrain parkers that are parking on these streets and causing traffic. But then you're telling me the lot's not full. I don't know if you want to comment on that. That just was a point of.
Yeah, so if I can.
Paid parking.
Yeah, that's
It's
exactly it. I
$5
was
a
going
day.
to say, if I can, in my prior role here, and Mark actually has worked with them more recently, we've tried to work with Caltrain to get them to fully utilize that parking lot. We're actually even leasing a portion of that parking lot right now to mitigate some of the impacts of the parking garage being closed in California Avenue. So that is a paid lot. We actually expect that if this is enacted, that during this pilot period, we'll probably see a jump in parking in that area. That's one of the things we'll want to measure, we'll want to monitor, is whether more people start parking in that Caltrain lot. And in addition to that, the California Avenue garage being constructed and losing parking there, we believe that it probably is having an impact in that neighborhood. We think that that's likely. And we think that that will probably be something that resolves once the garage opens, although, do you know the opening date?
The other thing is, I wanted to look it up to make sure I was accurate. The garage broke ground on April 22nd, so it was after the occupancy studies were conducted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so hold on. Just hold your question, Commissioner Alchek. Commissioner
finish?
Rupavar isn't done.
Yeah, I had 2 more questions. What about, I understand there are some businesses that are located in this area, I think a few dental medical offices. Do they also get hang tags, or are they just, even though they're in the area and they're residents, are they just kind of
So
out of
because
luck?
I think it's 2 businesses that are in the district, they actually have their own parking, and they did not have a desire to purchase or to become enrolled in this, so it makes the program a lot easier to implement, not having to deal with the employees that are within the district.
And then one final question, I think it was public comment by Mr. Miller, and I thought I understood him as asking, as to point D, we're required to find that other alternative parking strategies are not feasible or practical. Can you tell me what alternative parking strategies were considered and why they were found unfeasible and impractical?
Oh, we're just following council's direction when we brought the item to them in May. But we did not provide any additional alternative options for Old Palo Alto.
Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Commissioner Suma, followed by Commissioner Alchek.
So thank you, everyone who came out to speak, and thank you for staff. I'm not as concerned about any potential effects from construction of the Cal Ave parking garage. Everybody who spoke, and even more people spoke at our last meeting, indicated that this has been a growing problem for some time. And in addition to leasing part of the Caltran parking lot, also part of that is not available to anyone but the rather large apartment building there. They use that parking too. And also the city restriped the other parking lot where the police station is going to go eventually to hold many more cars. So I'm not worried that's going to be a big problem. And being in college, living in College Terrace, I can tell you that not everybody does have adequate off-street parking, especially older houses. I don't know anybody ever who has bought all 5 permits in my neighborhood. People don't want to spend more than they have to, and most people do not have 5 cars. I worry a little bit that a future tenant of the office building in that area, which I believe is 1 building but 2 business uses, that they might want to participate in the future, and how we've handled that in other neighborhoods like Southgate is different. So I appreciate 5 permits and your explanation that that's for consistency's sake. I am ready to, and I think the neighbors in this location are ready to move this forward, and I would be happy to do that make that motion after everyone has talked tonight. I did have one question for staff on packet page 10, which is page 3 of the staff report. At the bottom, it says, College Terrace is the only other resident-only parking program. And right before that, it says that the staff received a petition from the old Palo Alto neighborhood for a resident-only parking program. Is it possible for a neighborhood to request a resident-only parking program? Because I think other neighborhoods might have done that before. So I appreciate that we're being more consistent in some ways, but in other ways we're being less consistent. And the stated goals in the comprehensive plan and the findings all mention protection of neighborhood character and residential streets and those sorts of values, which I don't know how we apply those unequally across different Palo Alto neighborhoods. That being said, I am delighted to wholeheartedly support staff's recommendation for Old Palo Alto. But I think we might want to think about the problem of protecting certain neighborhoods differently than other neighborhoods, and just think about that more. So I'd be happy to make a motion, but I want to hear from all my colleagues first.
Yeah, so I have Alchuk and Chimpleton, but I want to hear from Commissioner Lowing before we do that, and I'd also like to see if you have an answer to my question from earlier, if you are able to provide that. But Commissioner Lowing.
Yeah, excuse me, yes. Can I first address a question to Commissioner Alchuk? Just want to get chair's permission. You discussed the questions around, I don't know if this is the correct word, but sort of the purpose or the strategy of an RPP. Could you articulate on what it is? Because I think, from a layman's perspective, it's to, relieve a parking crisis. But if you could just articulate, for my ears at least, what would be different than just that layman's definition?
Yeah, so look, this kind of goes back to one of the themes of then Commissioner Rosenblum's comments, which was when you don't price street parking, if you make street parking free, it will always win the competition against a paid lot. And so we have this underutilized lot that costs $5 a day, for example, and individuals are not surprisingly parking on the other side of the tracks and walking under it. And so there's sort of 2 questions. There's 2 answers to your question. The first is, I don't have a vision. I don't have the quote unquote, I can't articulate to you what the city should be doing. My question is, what is the city's idea of its goal? And what I mean by that is the goal of an RPP program to take what is typically viewed as a public asset, this on-street parking, and essentially make it exclusive to residential homeowners, regardless of how close they live to, business districts? Or is the goal, or should the goal of our RPP be to alleviate some of the difficulty associated with living in close proximity to a business district? We're talking about 75%. Should the goal of the RPP be, here's why. They said they're going to do a study at the end of the period. What's it going to tell you? How will you evaluate your survey at the conclusion of the pilot? There is no answer to that question, because there's no rubric that says if we've achieved 45%, we've succeeded. We don't have a way of saying 45% is our goal, because that's not, the city hasn't articulated its goal. So is our goal that during the day, the street is empty? If that's the case, just put up a sign that says no parking on this side of the street. If the goal is that the street be half parked so that residents can get some access, then maybe we should allow businesses to buy street-specific parking, like I think we do. I don't know if we do that in the downtown RPP, but it was something we discussed. Is the idea exclusive? So that's sort of what I meant by what is the strategy. I can't articulate that strategy on behalf of the city. My point was that because it hasn't been articulated on behalf of the city, we are left sort of floundering. That was my point.
Okay. But that's the case with all of the current RPPs.
That has been the case with RPPs we've reviewed.
Right.
We keep saying, how do we continue to do this? And we keep pushing it down the road.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I get that, because it's hard to evaluate if you don't have the goal in mind. So I totally understand that. I'm also quite sympathetic to the issue, which has a lot of precedent, we just heard, that a resident can buy 5 passes. In general, I don't think that's the ideal. So that's something that we should just look at across the board as being changed. I'm not sure that we should try to be baking that into this one right now. And as always, I'm very supportive of comments that ask for more data so we can make better decisions, as Commissioner Riggs just outlined. It was a much more detailed question than the one I asked, which is there data to support why there's no spot here? But we were kind of on the same point. And that's been, frankly, a chronic problem in the issues that we've gotten on parking. That there's just not enough data there, nor is there, sort of a valid goal. The issue, however, is that at least some of us asked last time for a pilot, and by definition, a pilot is, or a prototype in corporations, or what do you want to say, is it's a way to get data in a real live setting, as opposed to speculate what might happen. So the question also that was raised about, excuse me, about when we get to the pilot, which is set up here in the recommendation to be 1 year, which is frankly a short amount of time in Palo Alto, but I actually agree with that 1 year. By definition, there has to be an evaluation period before that. So I guess it would be helpful for us to know, when is that? After 9 months, or 8 months, or 6 months, because you have to get data and process it like you've had to do to get here. So it may be that after 6 months, you have to start doing another analysis to get to a recommendation on changes to be made in the pilot, so it doesn't just automatically go away at the end of October of 2020. So not sure if it's, again, something that we should wait on, or that we should demand that goes into this particular pilot. But I do agree it's debatable. The other thing, the common thread here is that this has been a years-on problem, getting worse because of the Caltrans situation. And to me, the risk of having the 1 year pilot not be perfect is a lower risk than not doing anything for 6 or 12 months while we continue to study this.
All right, so I have the second, no, I get the floor. I have some questions. I've been polite the first time around. So I have Alto, Templeton, Summa. I have a couple of questions. Wanted to see, if you feel uncertain just kind of going off with data, I'm totally happy to say we don't want to do that. But if you do have a little more finesse data you can share, that'd be great.
Yeah, we do have some data available to share with you. So.
Yes, so if there's any particular block that you're interested in, we have information available on the occupancy for the particular day and time, but nothing as a comprehensive report at the moment.
But so as you're looking at it, are we saying that some of these, I'm sorry, I'm not looking at anything, but some of these streets near your orange 54 to 74% are closer to 74% than 100%? I'm assuming there's a bigger.
Yeah, so I'll just give you some numbers. North California on the north side, Alma and High. We're at 100% occupancy. I'm not sure what this time, this is at noon on the 24th.
Just keep them all consistent.
North California, High and Emerson, we're at 100%. Nevada at High and Emerson, we're at 88%. Nevada at Emerson and Ramona, 67%. Nevada High and Emerson on the south side. Sorry, and I should be saying south, that's 100%. Nevada on the south side at Emerson and Ramona, 75%. Maybe I'll just give you the 100% if that's all right. This is going to be a long list.
No, you know what? I have enough. I have enough information. Okay, that's fantastic. That would have been really helpful.
Yeah, I concur.
And I think in the future, we need more tranches in that, or just give us a histogram or something that actually shows kind of where, what the spread is. So I guess then I have a comment that I definitely see a couple blocks where there's a acute problem, but what I don't see is creativity in solving the acute problem, and I think this gets at kind of the findings we had to make that we didn't have data to make when we heard this the first time. So the fact that we've exhausted all possible solutions and all possible like tactical deployment solutions that we could actually go out and do tomorrow, we have not. And that's from a practitioner standpoint, we could create paper hang tags and give them to people on that block and do that tomorrow. And I don't know why we aren't exploring potential solutions that actually would deal with the acute issue as opposed to this cumbersome policy where the issue of occupancy degrades pretty quickly. We have 75 to 60, 67% within 2 blocks of the Caltrain station. We ran a program at UC Berkeley when I was the transportation program manager there, and we basically allowed for employees, it was employer paid parking with a block face allocation. So basically you can sell a certain number of permits to employers per block face and still preserve a certain amount of that block face to be protected for residents. And so I don't know why, I guess if we're coupling something like that with enforcement, I don't know why we wouldn't explore other creative solutions as opposed to something that's not rubric-based. And so I guess I'm really struggling with this because what I see is, from based on data, is actually not as acute of an issue as we thought it was, except for basically a 2 or 3 block radius. And I don't think people will overflow into Caltrain. I think they'll park further out. This is really the way it works. Unless you do RPP everywhere, you get spillover into the parts of Old Palo Alto. So I think that people are rational. They're not going to pay $5. If it did, we'd price all parking everywhere because it'd be just like this wonderful world where we'd make money off parking in residential neighborhoods, and it just doesn't work like that. So I just don't buy it, and I think that my worry is that we've not explored like really tactical, creative opportunities here that would not only benefit neighbors, but wouldn't would not follow this antiquated and I think ad hoc process. So I think that's, I don't need a response. It's just, but if you could provide data, maybe more data next time around, I'd be very appreciative.
Will do.
I'll check Templeton, Suma.
Okay, I generally accept the premise that perfect is the enemy of good, and I support recommendations that may not be perfect in an effort to sort of achieve some objective and hopefully tweak it as we move forward. That's not really how I feel about this one. I feel like this one is not just imperfect, it's not good.
Vice Chair, also, just speak in your mic, please.
Yeah, I feel like we're not at good yet, and that's my concern. There's a part of me that feels like you have 300 spaces that are off the street right now and under construction. So are we choosing one of the most inopportune times to create an RPP? Because where are those people supposed to go if 300 of the spaces, I mean, we've always known that Cal Ave is quote unquote congested. So if there are 300 spaces not available now, where are these people going to go? I'm really surprised that not a single business sent us a letter. It made me wonder whether whether parcels on the other side of Alma really understood what we're doing here tonight, to be perfectly frank. I don't know, maybe they were noticed, maybe we did 500 feet, maybe businesses and commercial parcel owners are two different things.
It wouldn't get there.
So there's a concern there because they may wake up in a month and go, whoa, that's a different calculus for the Caltrans user. I guess I would be a little bit, let's say it costs you $5 a day to park in the Caltrans lot, and you suggested that you would allow non-residents to buy permits for the equivalent of, $30 a week. Like when we talk about alternatives, like would a bunch of day-long parking meters work around this park? Would that have encouraged those people to maybe drive to the other side and pay $5 instead of $8? I think we don't have a strategy that bifurcates the Caltrans rider and potentially an employee of a business that creates a benefit for all residents in Palo Alto to some extent by operating. And, we've been on this commission together now long enough, and I think as a group, we feel pretty strongly that Cal Ave's retail charm is pretty important. And the number one thing we hear from businesses typically is that they can't find people who are willing to make the commute, and that parking is a very big challenge. And so I am a little worried that because our strategy doesn't really identify, because of the strategy, the non-existent strategy doesn't really identify those two parkers separately, we don't have a good way of alleviating the challenge we're creating by the lack of parking spaces taken away from by the garage construction. So let me put it this way. Oftentimes when we have a decision that may have impacts that are complicated, like this one, we take a little more time. And I'm not suggesting that we take this off the table. What I'm suggesting is that we create an incentive for staff to sort of come back to the table in 30 days, and maybe it's 60, I don't know how long this should take, with answers to these questions so that we can say one of two things. Number one, we found the answers adequate and we support this parking RPP and we recommend that council do so. Or two, we don't necessarily find these answers adequate, we don't support the RPP, and that's our recommendation to council, and council can do what they see fit. I just think a recommendation based on our current information it's not good. It's not perfect, it's not good, and I really think we can create an opportunity here to make it better if we just take a little more time.
Thank you. Commissioner Templeton and then Commissioner Suma.
Thank you. I just have a process clarification based on some of the comments I've heard today. On packet page 10, there's the municipal code is cited. Section E refers to the process for the RPP, that it needs to be seen by the PTC no later than September, and then forwarded to the council no later than September 30th. If we were to continue this so that you would have time to prepare responses to questions that have come tonight, would it be possible to have it back on the PTC agenda in September and still meet this timeline, or is that off the table? How does the timing work? Sorry, guys. I know that's kind of a technical question, but I want to make sure we all understand as we make this recommendation what the implications are if we don't act tonight.
Was it section D on page 10?
E on packet page 10. Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask if Philip wants to speak to the possibility of bringing it back. I think we have the time to possibly agendize it. I don't know if we'd be able to answer the questions. I'd ask Philip to respond to that. And I don't know if Sandy, you know, the impact of if it somehow did not come back by September, if that evaporates the work, or if it can continue and go to council at a later date. I'm not sure about that.
I think there were two questions there you were asking, so maybe we can take the legal question first, or the evaporation question first.
So first, let me take the non-evaporation question, which we'll need transportation to weigh in on more specifically. But from a code and legal perspective, you can certainly continue it for 30 days. It's just a matter of whether or not administratively and logistically that's sufficient time for staff to provide some sufficient additional work to satisfy the commission's desires. So it doesn't evaporate the work if the commission does not act by September 30th. I think then there is a question of whether or not what the commission might want to do is forward a recommendation to council not to adopt or deny the RPP, but instead do further study and get some additional information. So because the code does say the commission shall forward a recommendation to council by September 30th, I would suggest that the commission take some action, but that recommendation could be do some additional study and come back later in the year.
Okay, and as long as council has it in their hands by September 30th, are you still able to make your November 1st timeline, or is the timeline impacted?
No, the timeline, I think any action other than approval tonight would probably impact the timeline for implementation. I'm not sure about how the ordinance plays into that, but it would certainly hold, because we would need to begin ordering signs and developing contracts for enforcement and all of that. That said, stepping back, the other question that I would have is what things the PTC would like to see if they saw this revisited, because I will say that 30 days could be reasonable for us to provide more data, such as Chair Riggs requested, that we just would need to compile and organize better, potentially to go out and redo surveys in order to understand better what the impacts of the garage at this current date are, or this current time. But things like developing, a parking occupancy standard, which is something that I'd love to have in association, as a trigger for when these RPPs and all of that's a greater policy discussion that needs to occur.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. I think it helps clarify the decision and recommendation we'll be making.
Commissioner Summa, followed by Commissioner Lowing.
Okay, so a couple of things. We already established that since one of the parking lots is not available, that staff has found other parking spaces, so it's not like we're out 300. And the public has come, there may be no one in the room that thinks our RPP ordinance is perfect, but the public has a right to come forward and request this. They have met all the conditions, and continuing it in a way that makes it impossible for them to get this program this year seems frankly punitive. I think there's a misconception that the goal is empty streets. I can tell you, as someone living in the first RPPP in Palo Alto, on a street which is, the other side of my street is a mixed-use zone. It's Zone CN. There is no expectation of empty streets ever, because I live quite close into the business community. It was a choice I made. I'm always going to have more 2-hour parking. Every single RPPP allows 2-hour parking, and if you underestimate the need for both residential and businesses to have short-term parking and circulation of that short-term parking, it's a grave mistake. Businesses would go out of business near me if they couldn't park on my street, especially restaurants and dental offices and medical offices. And there are times when I come home and I still have no parking on my street, and that's after 8 years of what I consider a very successful RPP. So it is never the goal to not have the close-in streets provide the same kinds of services that they did to help businesses and the residents with short-term parking. Residents need it too. Businesses need plumbers to come. Businesses need shredding services to come. It's the expectation of empty streets is not what this is about. So I am ready to make a motion to move staff's recommendation.
So are you making a motion?
Yes,
or
I am making a motion to move staff's recommendation.
Do I have a second?
Yes, I'll second it. I have some comments.
Okay, motion and second. You're up, Commissioner Lawing, anyway.
Yeah, so just trying to figure out a way to split the baby and still keep them all alive. One option would be to have you give us a hard date that you could come back with some of these things we talked about that are, I'll call it, incomplete. One of which is sort of the goals for this RPP. We couldn't be solving that for all RPPs. It would have to be what we want.
Commissioner Lawing, I just want to make sure that you understand, I don't believe that was the motion that was made. So the motion on the floor is not that. So if you could just make sure in your comments that you're clear.
No, I'm trying to consider if there should be any amendments to this.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that you're understanding, because I'm looking over here and seeing Commissioner Suma. I'm sensing that she's not. So please proceed.
So what I'm saying is I think that this is valid, and as we always say, the minutes are going to record some of the concerns we have. We can make the recommendation and note the concerns and go straight to council. And I see the main concerns as being goals, a specific, I mean, by definition, there has to be an evaluation, but you haven't told us what it is, which is a quite valid comment. And so we would need to know when that timeline was to be started, or council at least needs to know when that timeline would start, how you would make the decision that we should move forward after the pilot or not. And the third thing, the impact of this garage. And the fourth thing, consideration of reduction from 5 to 3 on the hang tags. So we could either ask you to come back with that, or we could add those comments in our recommendation. So I just wanted to follow up on Commissioner Templeton's question, because I wasn't sure that I heard exactly how soon you could come back with answers to those questions.
So I think that's just a question for staff, and Philip, if you could get those items that were mentioned. I think, I'm going to go on a limb, I think that you included all of those in your comments to us, with the exception of the what I call the rubric for the number of hang tags provided, or the number of spaces provided, but maybe you could respond to that one. Hey. Sorry, Steph, do we need to, can we continue our dialogue while you guys are doing that? Okay, so I have, Commissioner Lau, do you have anything else while they're dialoguing this?
Not till I hear the answer to that question.
Okay, so any other comments pertinent to the motion on the floor? I have a light from Commissioner Olczyk. Is this pertinent to the motion on the floor?
I mean, it's pertinent to your comment, which I think is in support of the motion on the floor, which is that maybe it's just that I'm skeptical of the idea that local government will take an action, and then after that action takes place, they're going to tell you by what rubric you should evaluate its success. So we're talking about this review that will take place in 9 months or at the conclusion of the pilot, and that review will tell you how the street is parked. And because no one's ever articulated what our goal for how much parking should be on the street, let's say in 7 months they come back and say, our goal is exactly what we achieved. Kudos. The question is, and he mentioned it, it's a policy idea. We have to figure out this idea. My big concern is what the justification for 5 parking spots is that we've done it 2 times. By the way, those 2 times happened at the same time. And so essentially the reliance here is that the precedent that we are setting is the reason for why we continue to do what we're doing. And that is a little self-serving, because I would argue to you, why don't we try 2 permits? And the logic there would be, we don't have a logic, so why continue to set a precedent if none of us feel comfortable with it? There's a lot of, I think making the recommendation that we come back on September 30th with as much as you possibly can, and then at that point, making the call whether or not we want to make a recommendation to council would be a wiser choice. It's just 30 days. Gives them an opportunity to do some of the work.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Olczyk. I think Chief Transportation Official, did you want to weigh in?
He's been here 2 weeks.
Philip, did you have something you wanted to get a word in?
Yeah, probably. Sorry. But I'm struggling to remember what. I think that anything that the PTC does, as long as it's forwarded to the council by September 30th, I think we're okay. Sorry, I'm not catching the mic enough. I think as long as it's forwarded to the city council before September 30th, we're okay as far as implementing the program. It will, however, delay the start of this program likely till March.
Okay, I see no lights. Commissioner Lowing, did you have additional comments based on your questions to staff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite disturbed at that answer, because I don't know how, if they came back within 30 days, we would be postponing the implementation by 4 months. I still haven't had my question answered. Could you be back here in 30 days with addressing the 4 items that I noted, which is the goal, in your judgment, for the for the old Palo Alto RPP, the timeline and criteria for evaluation, and any impacts on the garage being down, and why it's 5 instead of 2 hang tags? It's really, when can you be back with that information is the question.
I'm sorry, can you clarify the evaluation criteria and timeline? Are you talking about for the pilot? What
Yes.
the time? Okay.
And we can't do an evaluation if it was successful until we know what the goal was.
Yeah, understood. So that would not be a problem. None of those items are things that we could not bring back in 30 days. The reason for the delay until March is because we order our permits at set times during the year. There's economies of scale. There's a large process in actually processing and preparing all the permits. So we do all of our RPPs at the same time in order to be consistent, same time every part of the year.
Can I,
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. I think if Commissioner Suma, it's fine, but let's try to keep to the motion, and I think I'd like to
speaking to my
call
motion,
the
which I haven't done yet. So if you look at the findings that are set forth in 1050-030 of the municipal code for designating a residential preferential permit zone, and the policy implications from the comp plan that were quoted, the goal lies in there. We don't need a specific goal for this neighborhood that is any different. I mean, legally, they are allowed to ask to be included in this. They have done so, and they have fulfilled the requirements to do so. I don't understand what further goal we need other than the policy implications from the comp plan and the findings from the ordinance itself. I think we should just call the vote.
Chair,
Yeah.
I'd like to suggest to the maker a friendly amendment, and she can accept or not.
Okay.
So the amendment would be that we would approve this, but upon presentation to the council, staff would have to identify the evaluation criteria to continue the pilot. And they would have to comment on the garage being down.
So in the interest of...
Wait, and the third one is that, and they should justify 5 instead of 2.
I will not accept 5 instead of 2. I will accept the other amendments.
Okay, then I withdraw number 3 in the interest of moving this along.
Okay.
But you'll accept A and B?
I will accept moving staff recommendation and with a suggestion that that staff provide more information to the council when they consider our recommendation and this item. And as I understand, it's the implications of the parking garage.
No, be really clear about this so we have it in the record. The number one thing is that have to tell us how they're going to evaluate the success or failure of the Old Palo Alto RPP to decide whether or not the pilot should be continued, because by definition it's a pilot, which means it may not be continued.
Okay.
And the second thing is implications of the parking garage issue there.
I will accept those 2 in the interest of moving this along, although I think that the construction of the garage is temporary, and I believe it has been alleviated. But that's fine, and I'm assuming that staff would have a set of criteria to evaluate the success of the program that would largely be informed by how the residents feel it has worked. But we can leave it in there just so we can go ahead and vote.
I believe Commissioner Timerson has a comment, and then I think we're going to call a question.
Yes, I don't know if it's in order for me to try and make one more amendment. Is that allowed?
Yeah.
Okay. So I appreciate the inclusion of success criteria for the pilot when presented to council, so thank you for suggesting that. The other suggestion I would include is a commitment by staff to investigate the creative alternatives in the intervening year before the presentation for renewal request. Would you be willing to?
Can you say it again?
For staff to agree to investigate the creative alternatives that Chair Riggs suggested in the intervening year during the pilot, so that when we are looking at renewal 1 year from now, that those creative alternatives are included.
I'm a little uncomfortable with that, and the reason is because none of the other neighborhoods that have RPPs were held to that standard. I don't know legally how we can provide something to one neighborhood and not another, and I think that the staff has made some strides forward in doing that tonight by allowing them to request 5 that other neighborhoods have. There are still some things that I don't find equally applied across the city, but I'm assuming we're going to have more broad policy discussions about TDM and other creative parking policies. I don't think that needs to be a condition of the approval of a well-established ordinance that other neighborhoods across the city have used. So I would prefer not to include that one, I'm sorry.
One quick response, just respectfully, Commissioner Suma, it's part of the ordinance to investigate other alternative parking strategies. So.
Okay, I think I'd like to move us to a vote. We have a motion on the floor, we have a second, we've had plenty of dialogue.
I haven't finished. Since it is part of the ordinance, and you pointed that out to me, I will accept it.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, so ready for vote? So all in favor? Say aye. All opposed? I'm assuming the motion does not carry? Okay, so motion fails. I'll entertain another motion. Commissioner Alczyk?
Okay, I move that we continue this item to our next meeting, or I should say the meeting after our next meeting, to give staff an opportunity to come back and answer as many of the questions as you possibly can. And I think the ones that Commissioner Lowing had suggested, are at the heart of this, but as many of you took a bunch of notes, everything that you possibly, so I would move that we continue the item to September 25th to give us an opportunity to approach this process with our strategy, that with a goal in mind, and then at that time, this commission can once again determine whether or not we want to recommend the RPP's what do you call it? Approval to the council.
Motion on the floor, so I have a second. No second. Is there a second? Okay. So I don't think that motion goes anywhere. Do I have another motion? Commissioner Alczyk?
No, I didn't. Sorry.
I'll make a motion.
Commissioner Rupavar?
Yeah. Although I don't know if I can articulate this well, but my motion would be to approve the RPP program, but with all of the points raised by Commissioner Lowing and all of the points raised by Commissioner Templeton. But you just said no to the 5 to 3 hang tags. You said no to that.
Okay, we're going to no table. That's not our protocol. I think it's clear what Commissioner Lowing has said. Are you done with your motion?
If I don't need to reiterate what Commissioner Lowing has said and Commissioner Templeton, I'm done.
So motion from Commissioner Rupavar, second by Commissioner Templeton. Any dialogue on that motion?
We just want to clarify so we can capture the motion accurately that it was everything that Commissioner Lowing and Commissioner Templeton added, which included the 3 hang tags instead of 5. Is that correct? 2 instead of 5.
Do you want to reiterate?
Yeah, 2 instead of 5.
If I can maybe, I think that there was not a specificity in what he was saying. It goes back to my original question, and if I'm mistaking what you're saying, I'm saying show us a rubric for whatever that number should be, because we've been using anecdote for far too long.
Oh, that's fine. I was just capitulating to the maker of the motion. I don't think that one is material. So I'm in agreement with you, but she wanted that in the motion, so if she drops that, then...
No, I want all the issues considered.
Commissioner Rupavar, can you clarify if you are recommending, your motion is to recommend moving this forward to the council with the additional comments by the commissioners? Is that
Yes,
correct?
with all of the comments accepted in. Because again, I think, and I'll explain my reasoning, I think, we shouldn't just rely on precedent. This is how it's always been. We really do need to think through things and understand why we're making certain decisions.
Right. I'm going to ask if Ms. Gaines can restate what we believe is the motion on the floor so that we can capture that if that does pass and be sure to enact it properly.
My understanding of the motion on the floor is to approve the RPP with the additional recommendations for staff to come back with specific criteria, evaluation criteria, and the timeline for that evaluation to know about the success of the pilot program. To also look at the impact of the parking garage construction and the parking garage itself on this RPP, and also to have a justification of some sort about the number of hang tags being 5 or 2 to some degree. That one I can clear up a little bit. But the original way you said it is possible reduction of hang tags from 5 to 2. But if you wanted it to be the justification.
At least I didn't hear the primary one, which was that there be, a defined goal and timeline for evaluation.
I mentioned the evaluation criteria and timeline for the pilot.
Okay, great.
That's my understanding.
But
And I'm sorry, and Ms. Templeton mentioned also looking at creative alternatives needed to be looked at by staff during this pilot year. Yeah, to satisfy that bullet point, to say what you said off your microphone.
Right, so I think I'm the seconder to this, is that? Oh, sorry, Templeton, okay, then I'll stop.
Need to clarify this, okay. All right, so actually the motion is to move the staff recommendation, not to approve the RPP. It's because, the commission doesn't approve the RPP, just recommends approval. And are you asking that the staff come back during the pilot period or determine in the pilot period what the success criteria are? Or are you suggesting that they provide some success criteria when they forward this item to council for the approval of this resolution? What the maker of the motion?
When it goes to council.
Okay.
Not after, yeah.
Okay, but then during the pilot period that staff would look into alternative, creative alternative methods to address the parking issues in that area.
Correct. What I'm suggesting is when it goes to council, that it will include a commitment written in the resolution that staff will, before it's renewed, have something for us to consider that meets that ordinance.
Okay, yes,
criteria.
yes, I understand.
Okay.
And then with respect to the number of hang tags, are you suggesting that they include a justification for the number of hang tags when this item is presented to council for the pilot period? Is that correct?
That's up to the maker. I just think it should be looked at, but it depends on what she wants in the motion. If you just say review the number of hang tags in the context of our prior discussion tonight.
Okay. Review at some point during the pilot period the number of hang tags. And have
I think I'm misunderstanding the motion now too. I understood her motion to be, and maybe that all of those 5 things would be completed and presented to council. If I'm misstating
No, that's
you,
exactly.
then please.
Yes, that's exactly what we're thinking.
I think you should make that excruciatingly clear.
That was the whole point. Everything needs to be evaluated before.
No, but what the Commissioner Templeton clarified was that it will be presented to council, but not at the time that this resolution for the pilot it goes to council.
I'm sorry, clearly there's a misunderstanding. Let me try again. I want what is presented to council in September to include writing that describes how the roll-off will happen, that will be reflected in success criteria that will be included in the presentation, the resolution presented to council. It will also be, the resolution will also include text that says part of that roll-off criteria will be to provide data that we don't currently have. In other words, if we're going to do a provisional approval of the RPP request from this neighborhood without information that we need, we want to ensure that we have it a year from now.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the text will be included to go to council. The research will be done before the renewal.
Right. Yeah, okay, that's what I understood.
Okay, all right, thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I think we're done with clarification. I have Commissioner Suma followed by Commissioner Olczyk.
Should we speak to our
Oh,
To be clear, I'm still confused. Are we do you want to recommend only 2 hang tags, or do you want to recommend that council look at the number of hang tags? Permits.
I want to recommend that council look at the number of permits, but understand why we're going with 5 as opposed to what we would, maybe 2 or 3.
Does
that
the
make
ordinance
sense?
provide a legal right for them to have up to 5 permits per household?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
Commissioner Olczyk, and then I believe I didn't give Commissioner Templeton a chance to speak to her second.
Okay, I'm struggling with this, and I think in the same way you might be, and I need you to help me understand this. But I think there's a presumption here that we can make a recommendation that's somehow conditioned, like we recommend that this RPP be approved, but that staff has to present to the city council this criteria before city council makes their determination. For example, the goal criteria. And it is my understanding that there is no power for us to dictate what staff does. Staff can simply put a paragraph in the report that says this was their motion. And staff doesn't have to do any legwork with respect to the criteria or the goal. And so, with all due respect, the notion that they're going to come back in September to City Council with this information City Council is basically going to get this recommendation and say, the commission asked for this, and presumably they're going to say, well, did you get a chance to do that? I mean, how does this work? Can you help me understand, do we have any authority to dictate how this gets presented to City Council? Could we, for example, say, we recommend approval, but you have to explain the criteria by which you will evaluate this?
The commission cannot direct staff, but the commission can certainly make a recommendation to staff, and it's likely that the council will ask why they did not follow through with those recommendations if staff does not, so.
So the premise of this recommendation is that in 30 days, or whenever this goes to council, council will then sort of put the squeeze on the staff, and then maybe in its high esteem, send it back to us in another month with the direction that staff do the things that we're asking. That's the best case scenario here, because
That's not what I heard from staff. I mean, it sounded that like staff said that they could come back with some of this information even to the commission. And so it wouldn't be my assumption, this isn't a legal opinion, but it wouldn't be my assumption that they are going to ignore the commission's recommendation and not provide the desired information to council if they can obtain it.
But staff doesn't have to agree with the commission's perspective, and they can present their own opinion.
Sure.
Okay. So my biggest concern here is that the feedback we get is that we're understaffed and not enough time, and we're under the gun, and there's always an opportunity to save money on some economies of scale. There's too many opportunities. I'm a little more skeptical of this, which is why continuation buys more time. But I just wanted to understand. I wanted to.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
Commissioner Suma, followed by, Commissioner Templeton. Thank you so much. I'm off my game tonight.
That's all right. We're having fun. I wanted to speak to the second because I think it's really important, based on the feedback we got from staff tonight, that we make a recommendation to council and keep with our timeline because the community members have expressed that they have been suffering and we need to address it. This is an opportunity for us to take a risk. Yes, it's a risk, but it's a small risk. It's only a one-year pilot. And if we can, have good faith in our new team members that they will include justification for some of their recommendations so that council can pick up where we have identified gaps, I think then we can move forward and try this out. So I hope that that good faith is well placed, and I trust you guys to come up with reasonable, short, specific, measurable success criteria, and to take the year to investigate how we could do something better, as some of the commissioners have suggested. So in the meantime, we do need to provide some relief for our community members.
Commissioner Suma, followed by Commissioner Lowing, followed by Commissioner Rubavar.
I have a suggestion, and that is just because it's the maker's intention to move staff's recommendation, to keep it simple and leave it at that. And in the minutes, they will see all of the things that we're concerned about and read about them. I just think it keeps it simpler and better, but.
Okay. Commissioner Lowing, followed by Commissioner Rubavar.
Yeah, I mean, just commenting on that last comment relative to the motion, the idea here is to get something very specific in terms of the core recommendations after our deliberation, given the lack of stuff, lack of data, et cetera, that we got, and to focus on that. And we're requesting, as was articulated by council, that staff just have this prepared for council instead of us, because we're trying to stay on target for the benefit of the residents and for the benefit of council. The default position is essentially that we already have acted, and we send a 3-3 motion with one recusal, and then they do have to read 40 pages of minutes. So I think the focus on these four key things and our asking a request for staff and staying on point here with the target date makes the motion supportable.
I don't have a comment. You can.
Okay. I think we're getting close to being able to. I also struggle with this. Similar to Vice Chair Altrick. I can't make the findings. I can't make one of them. I felt differently when this was here before, but now that I have data in front of me, given the data that I have, I would have preferred to see us continue this, and I think that we're making a decision in a vacuum. And I'm surprised that no one was willing to second Commissioner Altrick's motion. And I would have been willing, but that's usually not the role of the chair. So I'm going to ask if there's any more comments. Okay, seeing none, I'd like to get us take a vote. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, motion carries 4-2. I think Commissioner Altrick would like to speak to his dissent.
Yeah, I'll just say this. We're an unelected body. We're an appointed body. And when we put the city council in a position to have to sort of weigh in on an issue that privatizes what is otherwise a public asset, we're setting them up for failure if we don't do the work. Okay? Of course, I think we have to address the RPP issue in this neighborhood. But we need a system that doesn't simply benefit 50 residents at a time at an expense that we cannot measure. We have no way of addressing whether this will create an immediate problem because of all the construction that's happening on California Avenue. We don't even have a date for when that garage is going to be complete. Wouldn't it be nice if it was completed before this happened in March? But it probably won't be because they haven't really made that much progress. So, and I think it's a it's a missed opportunity if we don't utilize our apolitical nature, our appointed apolitical nature, to be insulated from the public in some regards, and ask the tough question about what is it that we want our streets to look like before we dictate what they're going to look like, which is private. Does it matter, for example, that there's a park in this little area? Do most residents use parks for 2 hours at a time in the middle of the day? I don't know. It just seems to me like without a vision, we're not doing City Council any favors. We're just putting them in a position to make a political vote, and I can tell you how it's going to go. Old Palo Alto is going to get an RPP before the end of the month. And the reason why is because there's nobody in this room to argue otherwise. And they'll probably get 5 permits because that's what we've done the last 2 times. And I really wonder what encouraging 5 permits does for our vision of discouraging single occupancy vehicles in Palo Alto. They're just, none of it makes sense, and putting the political body in a position to make this sort of, have this sort of, what we should be doing is forcing staff to make this commission the epicenter of the conversation about what the street should look like. Of course, I have faith in you guys to be good partners. You are not insulated from the politics of the community. When residents complain about the transportation official, which they have done relentlessly in the past, that is a heavy burden. You shouldn't be the bad guy. We should have a debate on this dais about what it should look like. We should get input from everybody in the community. It should be driven by our comp plan, and then, and only then, should we then establish RPPs. And the question is how many more of these are we going to set up before we force staff to have that debate? And by the way, you can't force the City Council to tell them to do that for us, because they get to make their own decisions. And again, political bodies are unlikely to make those tough decisions, especially in anticipation of election year. So,
I want to speak to my dissent. Streets are real estate. They are public real estate, but they're not for storing cars. They are to a certain extent, but they can be so much more. We haven't had a robust policy dialogue that's consistent with our circulation element about this. We have these climate goals, and the decisions we make about RPP have induced demand implications. I question whether or not this type of decision, as it continues, whether or not it's in conformance with our climate element. So we have these climate goals that, do these type of decisions, are they consistent with them? We're seeing the gradual assetization of public real estate and the transition over to the private real estate. I think Commissioner Olczyk made a very compelling case that this is a policy discussion that's not being had. It ought to be had. I mean, maybe we should eliminate all the parking. They should all be parklets. Why are we not talking about those type of solutions? Maybe we should, I mean, there are any number of creative opportunities that could have mitigated some of the neighborhood concerns a long time ago without even going down the path of RPP, because I am sympathetic to many of the people that have talked about some of the acute issues within the 2 blocks. But beyond that, this is not the data and the data issue and what we're shown here doesn't illustrate, in my mind, and interestingly, this is my research area, it does not illustrate a endemic need to have policy action. It needs a creative and tactical solution to an acute issue for a couple blocks. So I think that we're taking a kind of a not thought out process-based Band-Aid and putting it on something that could have a lot more elegant and sophisticated solution. And with that said, I have one recommendation, because I am concerned about one comment that was not addressed by staff and was brought up on the dais, is the noticing for this project. My back of the envelope calculations show that 500 feet does not include the bulk of California Avenue. I think there should be 1,000, if not 1,500 feet. I'm assuming, I'm not sure if you've done a buffer-based math, but I'm pretty sure 500 feet barely makes it to over the top of the Caltrain parking lot. So I think you just need to look at that going into the council hearing. I think that concludes this item. You know what, can we take a 10-minute break? Is that okay? What's that? Can we take a 10-minute break for us to use the restroom and?
You're the chair.
I think we're going to take a 10-minute break. So if you guys want to, you got all ready, I think we're ready to give Claire some relief.
Great. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Claire Hotchkins, and I'm the project planner for this project. The project before you today is 874 Boyce Avenue. So this is a property located within the R1 zone district near the three-way intersection of Homer, Seneca, and Boyce Avenue. The purpose of the proposed project would be to create a flag lot in order to allow for an additional housing unit while also preserving the existing historic structure at the front of the property. The project includes multiple components, including a request for a code text amendment, which would amend Palo Alto Municipal Code, Chapter 2120, which is our subdivision ordinance. It also includes a subdivision of a single parcel into two parcels. The existing parcel is oversized for this zone district and exceeds the R1 requirements. The two new parcels would each meet the minimum code requirement for parcel size of 6,000 square feet or exceed it. And the project would require two exceptions to the preliminary parcel map. One would be to allow for a lot width that does not meet the 60-foot minimum lot width requirements in the R1 district. And the second one would be for two access easements that exceed 100 feet in length. Under Title 21, typically it's the easement needs to be 100 feet in length, and the applicant is requesting one that's approximately 121 square feet and one that's approximately 128 square feet, feet. I do want to note that the proposed map exception for these easements was reviewed by our fire division, and they confirmed that they would allow for up to 150 feet for the easements while still meeting fire safety requirements if each easement is only serving one parcel at the rear. So in terms of process, a preliminary parcel map is required for any subdivision creating less than 5 parcels or units, but creating more than one or two new parcels. It also includes an exception for the lot design, which may be requested in accordance with Chapter 2132 of our code. It requires PTC review and council decision for the preliminary parcel map with exceptions. And code text amendments, other than zoning code amendments, typically only require council review. However, because the map is being reviewed by the PTC, the code text amendment is also included in this request. So just some comprehensive plan policy considerations. So this project encourages historic preservation, which is consistent with policy L71 of our comprehensive plan. It also encourages additional housing units, which is consistent with program H2 1.2 of our housing element of the comprehensive plan. And staff recommends that the Planning and Transportation Commission take the following actions. Find the project exempt from CEQA, recommend approval of the proposed ordinance to council, and recommend approval of the proposed preliminary parcel map with exceptions to council based on findings and subject to conditions of approval as outlined in the staff report. And with that, I'll turn it back to you. I wanted to let you know that the applicant is here today. They're not planning on giving a presentation, but they're available to answer questions if you have any.
All right, thank you. Any questions from commissioners? And I think that is Commissioner Templeton. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for this great report and presentation, Claire. I have a question on packet page 26, about the easements. Can you clarify how much of these exceptions and changes are being requested in order to avoid the private street. Second paragraph under easements, if other people are trying to find it.
Can you repeat your question really quickly?
Sure. So the report states that some of these exceptions are being requested in order to avoid having a private street. How much of what's being requested as an exception tonight is for that purpose?
Yeah, so the exceptions tonight for both the lot width and the easement length would not be required if you were to create a private street. The issue is that if you don't do an easement serving one lot at the rear and it becomes a private street, then it deducts from the lot area, which would be detrimental to the adjacent property owner's property and would not be supported, obviously, by them. So that was one of the issues that came up. And in reviewing the project, we determined that the definition of the private street was actually a voter initiative. So it's not something that could be amended without going to a vote of the people. So.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so any other questions? And I do have some speaker cards, so if you have, withhold your deliberations, we want to hear from the public on this too. Any other questions? Okay. All right, so with that said, we will open the hearing. I have two cards. I have Rod Miller. Is he still here? Had to leave? Okay. Okay, would you like to come up and, I just will need a card. Maybe you can provide some context.
I was just going to say, he's the neighbor at 876 behind the neighboring home, and he was just here just to give his approval. Because we've had multiple conversations with him. I know you can't take my word for it, but as far as why he was here, so.
And just for the record, I'm assuming that you are the you are representing
I'm actually
the applicant.
I'm the architect.
Okay.
My name is Leopold.
Nice to meet you. Yes. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, so Mr. Miller's not here, but thank you for providing some clarification. Herb Rock.
Thank you, and good evening, Chair Riggs and Commissioners. I urge you to reject the recommendation. This is being brought to you by a family, Loop's family, Chris Loop in the construction business with HRB long-term member David Bauer, and and he took over that business, and a lot of they did most of Roger Kohler's work. Another HRB long-term member, Mr. Bauer at 868 Boyce, and Roger Kohler bringing through an application on 850 Boyce just last year. The history is that the rejection that you can't have the flag lot in R1 district has been in the law since February 1989, and that it was amended specifically for flag lots regarding historic property on the front parcel in 2009, December, and then the family came in and divided the property with full knowledge of the law, creating this separate lot that could not have a flag lot, and they did that in 2012. So they're fully aware of what the law was when they did that division to get the advantage of building on the adjacent lot by having the front parcel, 876, meet that historic criteria to enable them to do flag lots behind it. So initially, they just want to change the law that they already created a parcel that they knew the law applied to them. This project is also being segmented. That is, they've indicated in 2 study sessions before the HRB last year that they want to increase the size of the house in front. and to be able to do that. And they want to make sure that even with the covenant, they could do that. So really, that should be a part of the application at the same time. In regard to the easement, I don't have a copy of the plans in front of me, but I suspect the two easements are side by side. And unless you permanently put a fence that nobody can take away and that you'll always know that it's there and check every day, you essentially got the width of a private easement street, a private street that serves 4 lots. It's silly to think that the properties on one side are going to only be using a 1-lane driveway on the one side, and the properties on the other side will be using the other 1 lane. So for that reason, for all those reasons, I believe you should reject this proposal. Thank you.
All right, I don't have any other cards, so seeing no other takers, we'll close the hearing. So first up, it looks like I have a Commissioner Olczyk.
Claire, thanks for your report. I found all of your analysis compelling. It occurred to me while I was working on this item that in Minneapolis, you wouldn't need flag lots anymore because they've eliminated R1. I thought this is a quite innovative way to create a new parcel and a new residential unit. And I think it's not surprising that we have to make these adjustments in our code to sort of accommodate this, because this is a unique situation that no one anticipated probably when they wrote these code sections. So, you know, I am interested in hearing what everyone has to say, but with my time, I'm going to move the staff recommendation and recommend that City Council make the finding and approve the changes.
I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. But okay, so there's a motion on the floor. Then I'm going to be kind of structured then with this, and what I'm going to ask is that we go in a structured way. If you want to speak to the motion, but if you have other things that you want to questions you want to ask or comments you want to make, please do so. So, Commissioner Walfold, can I start with you, if that's okay?
I will support the motion. I walked the block, looked at the conditions on the block. This seems to be consistent with prevailing conditions. I also checked with several previous city council members to see if there was any reason why we had a preference on the historic unit being front lot versus back lot in a flag lot division. Nobody could recall any reasons. So apparently we were just capturing the request at the time that code was written. So just given those things, I'd support the motion. Also, Claire, great slides, report really complicated.
I think we can all echo that your presentation was great. Commissioner Suma.
I'm inclined to support this as well, but I do have some questions. And one is in the ordinance itself. Section 1 is the definition of private streets. I was really curious why this was included in the ordinance, and because nothing is, there's no strikeouts or underlines. It's exactly the same except for one word. Is that why you put it in to add the word homes in the first sentence?
I honestly just included everything that was under this section 212301.
So I was just kind of confused, but also it does add the word homes in, which I'm sure was intended to be there.
Oh, sorry, I see what you mean.
Yeah. It just says in the code, it says traffic to or from 2 or more. It doesn't have the word home. So I thought maybe that's why you changed it. And
so home should be underlined then. Maybe our attorney did add that just because as he was reading it, he probably was thinking it wasn't really clear.
I think that's right. It's kind of hard to compare two things like that.
Yeah.
And then I have a question. On the city's planning website, it refers to Code Section 1810-130, which is the historic preservation incentives, and which does include R1, although when you go to the code.
Say that one more time, sorry.
So on the city's planning website, there is a page about historic incentives. And it has, as one of its bullets, section 1810-130 of the code, which is about the historic incentives.
Oh, yeah.
And it is about subdividing a lot to save a historic resource with the same kinds of provisions to guarantee that, the same kind of covenants, but it does include R1. So, but in the code, R1, so was R1 left out, taken out of that at some point?
I'm not sure the history, but that's why we ended up adding in this section under
the flag lot section.
Under the flag lot section.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that
'cause
seemed a little confusing to me, and I didn't know if it was a mistake, actually, when the code was, I mean, I would look into, if you haven't already, whether that was inadvertently dropped from the actual historic code, because also in what the flag lot changes that you're recommending do most of the same thing, but there's actually a minimum in the historic preservation section, and there is no minimum lot here recommended. So I think it's kind of inconsistent between, is that making sense, kind of?
Yeah, the
So-
4,000 square foot minimum or something.
So I don't know if you want to add a minimum in, or if you want to research whether R1 was left out of 1810-130 by accident, basically.
Okay.
And then
We can look into
look at having them not contradict each other, because I think that's always bad when the code does that. So, also, I know there's been two fairly recent R1 zone sites that subdivided for historic preservation reasons. One at 381 Lincoln and 1050 Waverly. It might be, you might be able, depending on what law allowed that, it was in the last few years, I think, it might help determining whether that other one dropped R1 by accident. So that is my only, that's my main concern, is that those two areas that address historic preservation, covenants, and subdivision be consistent. That's all for now.
That's great. So we will continue. I would encourage, if you don't really have anything to add, don't do that. But before we get to you, Commissioner Templeton, I forgot one thing. This is a quasi-judicial action, so we need to actually do disclosures. So in the spirit of fairness, I'm just going to go down the list, and people can say if they have anything to disclose.
No disclosures.
No disclosures.
You got to say it, Mike.
Actually, I only have to announce if I have a disclosure. So silence
Okay.
is presumed.
No.
No.
No, really. It's an
You're right.
obligation
You're
to
right.
announce.
No.
No disclosure.
Commissioner Templeton.
Hi.
You're right.
It looks like on this picture that they've already constructed a fence and kind of done an informal subdivision of the property already. Is that right?
I think there is a fence there, or was a fence there. Is there a fence? There is currently. Yeah. It's just an empty lot at the rear, though.
Oh, okay, okay. So I'm also inclined to support this. I'm a little uncomfortable with the links to which we're going to work around the private street, and I don't really understand the implications. And especially, it would be especially valuable to me for you to explain why it won't have any long-term implications for other projects if we allow this workaround to really literally change the code. So can you clarify why that's the recommendation?
So, as I mentioned, if it becomes a private street, then it gets deducted from the lot area. So the current easement runs down.
Sorry to interrupt. I understand why the applicant wants what they want. I'm trying to understand why we want to change the code for everyone based on this one application.
Yeah, so I think the reasons why the city is willing, or staff is willing to support this application is to support policies under our comprehensive plan that encourage historic preservation and encourage the addition of more units. So the way that we are changing this code is in a way that would not change private streets, and that also minimizes the application of future easements so that on future parcels and how that ends up getting implemented, so that if somebody were to come back in the future and we start getting a lot of lots that want to do this similar thing, it gives the PTC and then council another shot at looking at those on an individual basis and seeing if they're appropriate.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Also, another question that came to mind, and I think this has an obvious answer, but I want to ask it just for completeness. Could the same building goals be accomplished with an ADU in that spot? Or do we need to, I guess the goal is to subdivide and sell off the property, or how does that work?
Yes, so we did encourage an ADU as an alternative to exploring these options, and the applicant wasn't interested in that option. That would do the same thing in terms of adding an additional unit in terms of our inventory. But it would not necessarily preserve the historic property at the front. They could still. So under our historic preservation, as a Category 4 structure, if they're looking to do any discretionary application, then CEQA would apply, and therefore we could protect the resource. But under our current codes, if they were looking to do just a single-story residence, they could actually demo the home, even though it's a Category 4 structure, and could rebuild with a single-story residence. So.
Okay, so these changes will, as part of a trade-off, as a benefit for the city, will protect the historic resource in exchange for it. Okay, thank
Correct.
you. Commissioner Olczyk, anything to add?
Yeah, so just a couple quick questions. We have a number of 6,000 square foot and under lots in the city. Is there any, in your mind, policy discouraging subdivision of 12,000 square foot lots?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, other than the minimum lot size, ensuring that, we're meeting the minimum lot size, which anything over 12,000, presumably you could subdivide. And I guess the only ordinance that would affect that right now is the one that Commissioner Suma mentioned, that specifically leaves out the R1, but for reasons unknown.
I think it's safe, I wonder how you feel about this, but our staff feels about it. I think it's safe to say that our comprehensive plan actually looks favorably on the concept of subdividing lots that are in excess of 10,000 square feet, because to do so would inherently increase the number of residential parcels, which increases the number of residential units. And the interesting thing about your question about ADUs that I think is compelling is that there are restrictions embedded in our ADUs that sort of limit who can occupy the unit. So for example, if you rent your ADU out to a family, let's say you're a Stanford professor and you rent your ADU out to a family, and then you go on some teaching program in another university in another state, you can't actually rent your house. It has to remain vacant because both units can't
one unit must be, one of the two residences have to be occupied by an owner. So to some extent, our ADU doesn't necessarily always encourage the greatest occupancy of residences. So I think to some extent, this is, like I said when I made my motion, a really innovative way to work around a historic resource and also create an opportunity to create a new parcel that meets our minimum qualifications. So I just wanted to add that.
Commissioner Rupavar, anything to add?
I don't have comments.
Commissioner Lawing, anything to add?
Yes, thank you. Have you done an inventory or to see if there's any other situations like this? I mean, we're changing this law. Is it just going to fit one case? Or are there other situations, scenarios in the city where this might apply?
I don't have a full list, but I know that there is, it wouldn't be a one-off. There are definitely other cases where there are lots. It's hard to tell exactly because it would depend exactly on, whether they could meet some of the easement or private street requirements that would be needed to allow for that subdivision as well on each individual lot. But there are a number of lots that have a historic property that are in excess of 12,000 square feet. So.
Okay, so partly because of that is why you think that this is a better way to go than a variance or insisting on an ADU?
Yes, I mean, yeah.
So, again, this is just one of these policy considerations, like many of the items that we bring before you. It's a choice of how do we want to, there's a couple of gains here, an extra unit, but it's also, I think, principally motivated by our interest in advancing our historic preservation policies in the comprehensive plan and our zoning code. But we recognize that there may be different ways to approach it. We just also understand that if we explore and implement those, we may not end up preserving the resource, and that's a trade-off.
Yeah, and the comment there about the possibility of raising the historic resource as it's currently in the code, effectively not protecting that is, very sad and a discussion for a different day. This is not the agenda tonight. So it just seems like we're going through a lot of hoops for one applicant in one situation. Two commissioners already covered very important questions that I was going to ask about some things, so I won't repeat that. So I think that's it.
Sorry, I missed the it. I was, okay, so any other comments? If not, I think we should, we have a motion, we have a second, I think we should vote. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any opposed? Okay, motion carries 7-0. Thank you for being here. Okay, so 2 minutes till 9 o'clock. Approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve minutes.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you all. Any questions, comments, announcements, and future agenda items?
We have to vote on the motion.
Oh, do we have to vote on the motion? Do we have to vote on that, really? Motion second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? No. Minutes approved. Take it away. You got nothing. Any announcements from, look ahead for our next meeting?
I got a quick question. Do we know when the
20 seconds, man.
draft EIRs that we reviewed, do we have a date for that follow-up?
Are you referring to the Castellia project?
Yeah, the item from last time. Do we know, is there a timeline?
We're still in the public comment period. We've received probably hundreds of comments. It's going to take us quite some time to respond to this.
Okay, so like the timeline
We
closes?
do not have a timeline right now.
Okay, just checking.
All right, so we do have a discussion item, but you haven't gotten there yet, and I was wondering if there's any other, and so no look ahead in terms of agenda items. We have
So the one question that came up.
We'll get there.
That's the one we're going to get to.
Okay, so we do have a, thank you, Commissioner Lawing, for bringing up the Yom Kippur is on October 9th. I think we need to decide as a group if we're going to hold a meeting. I'm seeing from two people that they would prefer not to hold a meeting on October 9th.
Why don't we do this a little easier? How many people are not intending on attending a meeting on Yom Kippur? And then you can see if you have a quorum.
How many people are not intending to come on the 9th of October? All right, so we have 4.
Questionable.
4 max.
Yeah, I think we'll cancel October 9th.
Could we push it so we can be productive? Push it to the next week?
I don't know that we have enough, would you, before I cancel, do we have agenda that we can fill a meeting before, or do you recommend that we just cancel and?
I think if you were to cancel it, that would be fine. The pending item can be adjusted to a different date. We already confirmed that with the staff.
Commissioner Templeton.
I believe October's a month with 5 weeks in there, so just letting you know you have the ability to have different timing if you want.
I think we're going to be okay. I mean, it'd be one thing if we had, 3 items on each of our commission meetings that we needed to navigate that. But the only item that is presently scheduled was a discussion having to do with the intersection of Charleston and San Antonio or something. But another transportation item, but I'm not sure if that's action or an update, and it could move to the next meeting. Yes.
Is that a part of the Charleston corridor plan?
I'm sorry, I'm just seeing a
Yeah,
little
you
script on
just
the...
messenger. Commissioner Lowing, you still have your light?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, in terms of looking at the future agenda, at the last meeting, you said that you would try to put together one for the whole year.
Thanks, Commissioner.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry for cutting you off. We still need to get together and hammer that out, but we are optimistic that there's going to be some more meaty items for the commission to weigh in on. And from a policy perspective, just a couple of items to sort of put out there. One is the inclusionary housing component. We have a draft consultants report that we're expecting in about 4 to 6 weeks' time. And so once we get that report, our typical process might be to use that report and then frame some kind of an ordinance based on that and other guidance that we have from council and our own sort of perspective. But one thing that we're thinking about is maybe sharing the report with you before we prepare those recommendations and learn from the commission your perspective or areas of the report that maybe need to be refined before we come up with an ordinance. So that's one thing that we're looking at. We earlier in the year talked to you about EV chargers and how that need to address our parking standards. So that's one that we want to come back to and address. And then there's a conversation that we'd like to have, hopefully before the end of the year, having to deal with TDRs and how we might be able to use them to incentivize housing projects. So there's just a couple of things that we're working on, and I think there's probably a couple other ones too.
Okay, that segues to a related question, and it's a transportation question that we've raised, but I wanted to get on the record to find out when and what kind of policies were coming to us. My understanding from the council, I haven't reread the motion, but they directed that to staff and PTC, and someone has edited out 3/4 of the recommendations and saying that we don't need to comment on those. I'd rather have 35 come to us and have us give an opinion on which ones we'd like to comment on, and then have transportation or whoever go ahead and make that decision. But to look at 9, 6 months or whatever it was after it was recommended, I just don't find that acceptable. And I understand I'm talking to a planning guy now, not a transportation guy, but it would apply to any other things that come up, that we could be helpful on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I recall that the council did have the full list, but there was only a subset of that list that they had deferred to the Planning and Transportation Commission.
I can't remember the wording. I agree. I can't remember the wording.
Yeah. So I just don't know if it was 9 or some other number. I imagine if they referred, whatever the number is that they referred to the PTC, we're going to come back to the PTC and have that conversation. Philip's been on the job for 4 days, I think. So there's been a number of deficiencies in staff, vacancies, I should say, not deficiencies, but vacancies in our staffing. We're getting up to speed, and we want to have those conversations with the commission, but we just need a little bit more patience.
Yeah. But I think in Commissioner Lowing's defense, we've been asking for this all year, and we canceled a lot of meetings over the summer, and I really like Ms. Gaines, but like as chair, I've talked to her numerous times about bringing these priorities to us. So I candidly agree, and I think it's important to put on the record.
Understood.
On a different topic, last year we passed the housing incentive program, and I believe that not a whole lot has happened, although I believe that there's also some impetus to extend that into a different district, which is something we may see sometime in the future. And I just wonder, will there be any other thinking or just any other analysis on what's gone on with that? Is there anything else we need to do relative to that to make that successful?
So the application that the project that you're referring to is actually an application that was filed by a private property owner to redevelop property on San Antonio. And part of that request was an extension of the HIP, Housing Incentive Program, to that specific property. We had a pre-screening before the City Council where staff had recommended, instead of just focusing on the one property, that it be extended between, I think it's Charleston and Middlefield. And so ordinarily, again, this is an opportunity for us to get the Commission's early involvement on this. Ordinarily, we would do our analysis, come to you with a recommendation on the project and the ordinance as applicable. What we want to do is come to you with the policy conversation first before we've even drafted anything, to hear if there's any early feedback about applying those standards to this stretch of properties.
Yeah, I think that's great.
And that's in the near future.
And I think that's fantastic, and I think that if you also have any observations about just how to make the program successful in general, that would be, or maybe that's a different topic, but just we put a lot of work into that last year.
Yeah.
And if there are tweaks we need to do, let's tee up that conversation.
Okay, we'll give some thought to that. I think it might be a little bit early for us to have a response to that, but you're right. There has not been any activity following the adoption of that. And again, it was April 1st. So, it does take time for private property owners to develop plans and then submit them. So we may be in that window. In fact, I do know of a couple of properties, one in downtown and one on El Camino, where we've received contact from folks that are interested in exploring that with the HIP development.
Okay, I have Commissioner Templeton, but before okay, you're good. Commissioner Lawing, I just want to make sure you were done.
I was going to ask if we could also schedule an ADU update at the appropriate time, just sometime this year. Status on ADUs in terms of the numbers and how many are actually starting construction. Sorry? Memo. By memo, that's okay. But
yeah, we do a report to the council. I thought I sent an email with a link to it, but let me send you what I have again, and if there's interest in a study session discussion, we can have that.
Okay.
Commissioner Olczyk.
The local press suggested that there had been movement on the promise of housing on the Ventura area, and I'm not to suggest that that's like a credible source for information, but do you as staff have sort of any idea about we haven't ever really discussed that area, and I know that there's a community group, and I'm just wondering if you could shed some light on what happened at City Council that changed the way the city's looking at it?
Are you referring to the
Fry site?
The Fry site, yeah. So last Monday, we did take to City Council a report on the NBCAP and the effort to have a coordinated area plan there. The new information, I think, is twofold. One's a little bit not as new, which is around the historic nature of the Fry's building, kind of what that might mean for those who want to see it preserved in whole or in part. And then the second piece of information was that we have learned from the representatives of the Sobrato organization that they are at present at least not interested in demolishing the building. They would like to retain it on site. And, we don't have details of would it be the entire thing or the historic portion. There's different phases of that building. They weren't built at all at the same time. The building wasn't. And so the question kind of became, well, with the retention of the building, what is possible in the NVCAP area, what is possible on that site in terms of realizing the city's housing projections, and would we be able to realize the assumed number of units that could be on that site, at least as it's currently zoned. So without trying to predict the future, which is dangerous, our position and what we've talked about with the working group is that while the retention of the building could present some challenge to a scenario where the entire site is housing in the way that people might have envisioned, it doesn't necessarily mean that there can't be housing on that site that is significant, or that in the NVCAP area, which does include other parcels that have development capacity, that we couldn't see housing, and that we should continue to pursue the development of the coordinated area plan with that in mind, so we can think about how we might need to leverage the policies to incentivize and realize the housing there. Hopefully that answers your question.
That's a phenomenal answer. The follow-up question is there any change to the working groups? Is that continuing, or is that on pause?
Yes, it is continuing. We are hopeful that we'll return to council in the last meeting in September to bring forward the contract to expand our scope of work with Perkins Will, who's the consultant who's working with us on the NVCAP proposal. We're hopeful that council will support that and will continue that work. Again, don't want to predict what they will do, but they were favorable in moving the motion to bring back that contract to them.
Not that it's not publicly available, but would you consider just copying us on when that presentation is created to council, just so that we can...
that it's happening and what's going forward.
I'd love to read it. It sounds like we're outside of the discussion, which is fine, but I'd love to see what gets presented to them when you guys are presenting it to them. I'm sure I could have found it, but it would be nice to be copied.
It's nice to have something in your email box ping you that it's going forward. Yeah, that's great.
Thanks.
Certainly can do that.
Any other questions, comment? I don't see any. All right, seeing none. Yep, I can do it. It is, what time is it? 9:11. There we go. Finito.